Jai Hind, dear children. In the last video, we have discussed about the respiration plants and respiration in different aquatic as well as the terrestrial organisms. Now next, we can discuss the respiration or gaseous exchange in higher animals. In case of higher animals and human beings, they have lungs as the respiratory structure. Now, let us discuss about the respiration or gaseous exchange in humans. You all know that we have a respiratory system for the exchange of gases, right? This consists of so many organs. It starts with our nostrils, and then nostrils is followed by nasal cavity. Then next is the pharynx, and pharynx is followed by the larynx. Then there is trachea, and the trachea is followed by the bronchi, and the bronchi are divided into small branches called as the bronchioles, and the bronchioles ends up in small air sacs like structures called as the alveoli. This bronchioles and alveoli forms the lungs in our body. So these are the organs associated with the respiratory system. So these nostrils are the openings through which the air is taken in. Fine hairs as well as the mucus are present inside the nostrils, which filters the air that is taken in. So what are the functions of these fine hairs and mucus? These fine hairs and mucus prevent the entry of dust or dirt particles and the microorganisms present in the air to getting into the lungs. And these nostrils extend to the nasal cavity. It is the cavity where the air reaches from the nostril. These nasal passages are lined with small hair-like structures called cilia and mucus gland. The mucus gland produces mucus, which is a slimy, watery substance that moistens the air getting into our nostril. And the cilia helps in the easy passage of air through the nasal cavity. The nasal cavity leads to the pharynx. As you have studied in the digestive system, you know that the pharynx is the common opening for both the buccal cavity or mouth as well as the nasal cavity. The food comes from the mouth and the air comes from the nasal cavity. Both reaches the pharynx. And the pharynx is the place where it differentiates the food into the food pipe and the air into the windpipe. For this, there is a small flap-like muscular structure present at the pharynx called as the epiglottis, which prevent the entry of food into the windpipe. When the food reaches the pharynx, this epiglottis bends and blocks the windpipe, and so the food enters into the esophagus. What happens when the food enters into windpipe? If the water or food particles enters into the windpipe will get choked and the person will not be able to breathe in and out as the passage is blocked, and it might lead to the death of that person. Now this pharynx leads to the larynx. This larynx is a muscular and cartilaginous organ that forms an air passage to the lungs and the vocal cord. It is commonly called as voice box, as it causes the production of sound. When air is passed through the larynx, it causes the vocal cord to vibrate and produce sound. Next is the trachea. The trachea is the windpipe. The air passes from the pharynx to the trachea, and it starts from the throat and reaches the thoracic cavity. There present C-shaped cartilage rings around the trachea, and this cartilage prevents the collapse of trachea even if the air is not present in the trachea. Otherwise, the trachea will shrink when the air is not present inside the trachea. This trachea is also internally lined with cilia and mucus, which helps to protect the airways from being infected by the dust, dirt or microorganisms. and allows to breathe easily without any disruption. The trachea divides into two branches called as bronchi, and this bronchi enters into the lungs. The lungs are spongy, elastic organs which are protected inside the thoracic cavity and is placed inside the rib cage. The lower surface of the lungs rests on the diaphragm, which is a dome-shaped fibrous membrane which separates the thoracic cavity and the abdominal cavity. There are a pair of lungs, a right lung and the left lung. The right lung is bigger and composed of 3 lobes, and the left lung is slightly small and it composed of only 2 lobes. As the lungs are very delicate, they are protected inside a double-layered membrane called as the pleural membrane. And between this double-layered membrane, there present a cavity called as the pleural cavity, which is filled with the pleural fluid. And the presence of this pleural fluid provides the lubrication and prevents the friction during the process of breathing. As these lungs are elastic in nature, it can expand and can fill the maximum amount of air during the breathing. It is said that the total surface area of a full-grown human is about the size of a badminton court. So imagine how much surface area is there in our lungs. Inside the lungs, the bronchi divides into smaller branches called as the bronchioles. And this bronchioles ends up in a cluster of small air sacs, which are called as the alveoli. These alveoli are seen as balloon-like structures, a group of balloon-like structures present at the tip of the bronchioles. So, the air enters through the nostril, reaches the nasal cavity, and through the nasal cavity, the air enters into the trachea, pharynx, and from the pharynx to the trachea, and from the trachea, it enters into both bronchi, and through the bronchioles, the air finally enters into the alveoli. And these alveoli are richly surrounded by the blood capillaries. The actual exchange of gases, that is the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide, takes place on the surface of the alveoli. That is between the alveolar membrane and the membrane of the capillaries, blood capillaries. The walls of the alveoli as well as the blood capillaries are very thin and permeable, so that the diffusion of gases can take place easily. From the alveoli, the oxygen diffuses into the blood capillaries, and from the blood capillaries, the carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveolar membrane. So, alveoli are called as the functional unit of lungs. Now, after this gaseous exchange, the oxygen will be transferred through the blood vessels, from the capillaries through the blood vessels, and through the blood vessels, this oxygen reaches the body tissues in all parts of the body and enters each and every cell where oxidation of food takes place. In higher animals like humans, elephant, tiger, etc., it is difficult for the oxygen to reach each and every cells by the process of diffusion. So for that, a respiratory pigment called hemoglobin, which is red in color, is present in the blood, which has a high affinity towards the oxygen. This pigment binds with the oxygen in the blood capillaries near the alveoli and forms oxyhemoglobin, and then it is distributed to all parts of the body through the blood. This makes the easy transportation of oxygen from the lungs to all parts of the body. And as a result of cellular respiration, the tissues produce carbon dioxide, and these tissues in turn release carbon dioxide into the blood capillaries. This carbon dioxide is more soluble in water than the oxygen. So, This carbon dioxide combines with the water molecules and forms as bicarbonate, a dissolved form, and is transported through the blood vessels. And through these blood vessels, the carbon dioxide reaches the alveoli. And through the alveolar surface, from the blood capillaries, the carbon dioxide diffuses into the alveoli. And from the alveoli, it reaches the bronchioles, and through the bronchioles to the bronchi, and from the bronchi back to the trachea, and from the trachea through the pharynx to the nasal cavity, and through the nostrils, this carbon dioxide is released out. This process is what we call it as breathing. So in breathing, there occurs two physical processes. One is inhalation and the other one is exhalation. Inhalation means taking in air and exhalation means releasing out air. Now, how this inhalation and exhalation occurs? What all changes takes place in our thoracic cavity during this inhalation and exhalation? During inhalation, the muscles of the diaphragm contract and becomes flat and is pulled down, and the rib cage is pulled outwardly and upwards. And if you observe your breathing, when you inhale air inside, you can feel the changes in the thoracic cavity. That means that the volume of the thoracic cavity increases, and as a result, the lungs will expand. Now the volume inside the lungs increases and the air pressure decreases. When the volume increases, the pressure will decrease. So when the air pressure inside the lungs is lesser than the outside, the air flow from a region of higher pressure to the region of lower pressure. And now the air flows in. This is what happens in inhalation. Now next is exhalation. During exhalation, reverse process takes place. That is, the diaphragm muscles expand and it becomes dome shaped and pulled upwards, and the rib cage is pulled inwards and downwards, and as a result the thoracic cavity contracts and the volume decreases. The lungs also contract. Now when the volume of the lungs decreases, the air pressure increases. The air pressure inside the lungs will be more than that of the outside, and the air flows out from the lungs to the region of lesser pressure. So this is what happens during exhalation. One breathing cycle includes one inhalation and one exhalation. The average breathing rate of an adult is about 10 to 20 times per minute while in resting time. Now during this breathing cycle, when the air is taken in and out, we use about only 25% of the lungs capacity, which is called as the tidal volume of air. The lungs always contain a residual volume of air after each exhalation. This residual volume of air keeps the alveoli to remain open all the times, and there will be sufficient time for oxygen to be absorbed and carbon dioxide to be released due to this residual volume of air after each exhalation. So that is about the respiratory system in humans.
Now let us know how to draw the diagram of respiratory system in humans.
I hope you all understood the contents that we have discussed today. So let us recall the topics that we have discussed, which are the respiration plants, respiration in some unicellular organisms, aquatic organisms, insects, worms, and the mechanism of breathing and exchange of gas in humans. Now all of you watch the video once more and read the textbook thoroughly and then prepare the notes. Thank you.